Ohio State is off this week, so why are we here? Do you know why we're here?
Like the cafeteria food?
We never stop. The Buckeyes with the bye week before they play Cincinnati next week. We are here to still talk Ohio State in the Big Ten. Doug Lesmerises, along with Ari Wasserman and Bill Landis, and we have a couple questions we want to hit this week. The first one is, as we think about Ohio State right now, we have seen them play 3 games. We have seen them play a close game with Navy. We've seen them lose to Virginia Tech. We've seen them blow out Kent State. Ari, what percent of Ohio State have we seen so far? Their maximum 100% effort that may be out there. How close are they 3 games into the season? Are they close or are they a long way away?
That may be out there at the end of the year because everybody's expecting a huge change from a program and a team that has this much talent that's youthful. So I think that you have to take that in consideration with some of the games that they've lost this year, or the game that they lost this year, and some of the struggles that they've had. But in actuality, while I think that they're going to improve, and JT Barrett's only going to get better, he's only started 3 games, I think you've started to see, or you've seen the things that Ohio State's going to struggle with all year. I don't know how much drastically different this team's going to get in terms of being able to make plays on the outside when a team plays the Bear defense, or how they're going to run the ball efficiently against a team that stacks the box, or if they're going to have a cornerback issue who can't cover their top receiver. I mean, I think these are all things that are going to continue to haunt Ohio State throughout the year. Of course, they'll get better, but if I had to put a number on it, I think we're probably...
You do? What's your number?
Yeah, 75%, I think, of what Ohio State's maximum capacity is probably what we've already seen. I think that there's going to be a lot of themes. You know, the themes that they've struggled with, I think, are going to be year-long themes.
So that's pretty high.
Yeah,
I think we've seen a good portion of how good they are.
I do. It's weird to say how good they are. They're just young, and I think that they're in a situation right now where they're going to be experimenting and doing things that it's going to take more than a year to just fix. I think a lot of people go back and try to remember the 05 season where they had this miraculous transformation where they, almost beat Texas, the team that won the national title that year. But they were already really good at the beginning of the year. Just things had to come together, and when they did, it was fantastic. But I just don't see that type of drastic change in this team because I think the things that they're struggling with are deep characteristical traits that they need to fix, not things that just go away.
Bill, you've been getting a feel for the Buckeyes here. You've been doing our weekly rewatch segment where you watch the game Saturday and then Bill goes back and watches it again and breaks down the tape a little bit. Are you seeing a team that has a lot of room for improvement, or what's your number on what percent of Ohio State we've seen so far?
I think my number is pretty close to yours, Ari. Yours was 75. I think mine's slightly higher than that. I'm going to say 80. I don't see a ton of room for improvement with this team. I think they're young, and it's going to take more than just this season for this team to get better. I think against Kent State, we saw the offense. It wasn't dink and dunk, but it was short stuff and easy throws for JT Barrett and getting the guys the ball in space. I think that's it. I think that's the offense you're going to see the rest of this year, and they can fine-tune that a bit, but I don't know how much better it's going to be until these guys get more comfortable. They're able to stretch the field a little bit more. Defensively, I think obviously 66-0 shutout against Kent State looks good, but it's kind of tough to gauge the defense. I think that might be where the most room for improvement is with that 20% gap that I still see there. I think the defense can become a little bit better when you look at the front. The front 7 probably rivals most of any of the front 7s in the Big Ten. The secondary still has question marks, and that's probably the area of that defense that has the most to gain moving forward. So 80% is my number, 20% gap from the makeup, and I think the area where they can make that up is defensively.
I'm writing this down. 75 for Ari and 80 for Bill. When we talked about this question, I was high too, initially. I'm going to end up being, I think, a little lower than you guys know. I'm going to say 60% of what they can be, and I'm basing that almost entirely on JT Barrett. And I think the talk early on about JT Barrett from people who thought he could just step in and do this like that was unrealistic. I think he has a chance to be significantly better by the end of the year. I think there are times we've seen him stare down receivers. We've seen him maybe be a little hesitant, I think, when he gets pressure to know exactly when he should get out of the pocket and scramble and when he should stay and try to make a play. I think there are types of throws that he can make a little better, maybe some intermediate throws. I think he's a smart guy. I think he's a mature guy. I think he will improve. I think there's a chance. Now, he's not going to be Braxton Miller. He's not going to be Jameis Winston by the Michigan State game. I think it's possible he could be significantly better than what we've seen so far. So because mostly of that, and in some ways because of the offensive line, I agree with you, Bill, on the defense. I don't know that there's much more there than what we're going to see. But I think possibly because of JT Barrett, they could get a lot better.
One thing I will add is I think Ohio State's going to be playing a lot of teams that aren't very good. And I think
don't be mean to the Big Ten.
I'm being real with the Big Ten, and that's the best thing a friend can do. But seriously, I think that they're going to be playing teams that can't match up athletically, kind of the way Kent State did, not to the same extreme, but I think Ohio State's going to be able to go out in some of these games and impose their depth and their will on other teams, and that's going to certainly help in what it looks like. The question to me is, how much can this team grow in between now and early November when they go to East Lansing to play a team that can actually do athletically the things that Virginia Tech did to beat them? And so things are, in my opinion, especially if they get by Cincinnati, and we'll talk about whether they're going to do that next week, but if they can get by Cincinnati and get through the first portion of their Big Ten schedule while improving, things get interesting in November, but I don't think we're really going to know how much better things are until they actually play a team again that can match what Virginia Tech did.
Question 2 today. We're going to focus on the offense for a moment, and that means we're going to talk to Ari, because Ari loves playmakers. Do you love playmakers?
I love playmakers. I'm obsessed with playmakers.
So if you were Tom Herman, the offensive coordinator for Ohio State, who would you be featuring in this offense right now? We've seen them distribute the ball. You wrote about that Saturday after Ohio State beat Kent State. They got the ball to everybody. But if you were trying to prioritize going into a game plan, and obviously it adjusts each week depending on the defense, who are the guys on this offense that you would really want to see say, we got to get the ball to these guys?
I'm going to answer this question, but don't let me forget we have 2 questions from people who are watching live that we have to get to.
Right,
and they're good
loud.
questions, but I like it to be about me, so I'm going to answer the question first. Only half kidding. It's so tough because all we've heard about is Dontre Wilson, and we had a video Monday outside of Ty's Asian Bistro where we talked about, what Ohio State needed to improve on the most, and my thing was getting Dontre Wilson involved in the offense the way that they said he was supposed to be for the last, 10 months since last year. And I think I would feature Dontre Wilson, but I'm starting to doubt whether or not he's capable of doing it, because by now I feel like we would have seen it, especially against Kent State, where everybody but him scored, it seems like. So, the other one that I would say potentially is Ezekiel Elliott, but that might be a little bit tougher because Ohio State's still trying to gel on the offensive line, and they don't have the type of, ability to get 6.8 yards a pop like they did last year. So for Ohio State, and when it talks about, or when it needs to improve with the quarterback position, I think that means distributing the ball, and that means getting Dontre Wilson the ball on jet sweeps or hitting him on crossing routes or getting him the ball where there's 4 yards before a defender can hit him. And if they can do that and he can really make plays the way we thought they would, I think this offense would look a lot different. But, I'm starting to doubt personally whether or not he has it yet. Is he too small? Does he need to – does he play as fast? It seems to me that Curtis Samuel plays even faster than him, and he's a freshman. So whether or not he's capable of doing it, I think, is the real question.
I think it's still a small sample size on Dontre Wilson.
Yeah.
I'm going to be very curious after Cincinnati, after Maryland, by the midpoint of the season, where we are in this discussion. I would really want to get the ball to the tight ends at this point. We talk a lot about the ability of these tight ends. Urban-Meyer has said he likes his 2 tight ends in Jeff Hireman and Nick Vannett as the best tight end combo in America. We know Jeff Hireman's been hurt. He did not play against Kent State. They wanted to give him basically 2 weeks to rest before the Cincinnati game. But we saw Ohio State get the ball to Nick Vannett early in that game. I've always been curious about them getting those tight ends together on the field, where you can line up one in the slot, one in an H-back, or however you want to do it, create some mismatches. I really like those guys still athletically with mismatches in the intermediate passing game. I think that is an area where they still can grow, and I would really, Nick Vannett flashed that. I think that's something that still can be expanded upon. What do you think, Bill?
My guy is Curtis Samuel, and it's because this season I've been kind of looking for that guy who can get the ball in space and make somebody miss. And Dontre Wilson probably has that ability too. We haven't saw it a bit in a punt game, but not yet offensively. Curtis Samuel, I think, showed that against Kent State. A couple swing passes, he was dancing around a little bit. A couple of those wide runs, he was dancing around, beating guys. Looked kind of like Bill Landis circa 2002 CYO football star.
I don't even know what to say about that.
That was good. But Curtis Samuel is the guy. I think you want to get the ball in his hands, and now it's a tough situation because you mentioned Ezekiel Elliott. Excuse me. They have 2 running backs back there, and they kind of have to decide how they want to use them. And right now, Ohio State hasn't shown the ability to run the ball between the tackles and get that 6.8 yards a pop like you were talking about, Ari. So if you can't get that, if you're not able to run the ball up the middle, you might as well give it to Curtis Samuel on the outside and see what he can do with it.
Okay, so now we're going to go to questions of those who are loyal readers who are watching live. First, and this is something that we were actually trying to figure out a way before the show started to figure out, from Gladys on the Dice 8.
Great name.
Great name. Do the Buckeyes have a realistic shot to win a national championship or to be in the playoff this year? And Gladys, loving the name, don't get cute with the dice. What do you think, Doug?
I would say no. Not realistic. I think there's like a sort of a fantasy world explosion in the rest of college football that could maybe create a scenario where a 1-loss Ohio State team, if they ran the table, was being compared with a bunch of 2-loss teams, but I don't think it's happening.
No, there's just so much that needs to happen for Ohio State to even be considered in the college football playoff that, the odds are probably astronomical.
Yeah, East Carolina kind of. That's it. Next question, Hokie Wolf. He's always commenting on us. I know he likes us.
Wolf.
We love you, Hokie Wolf. What is the potential of the offensive line this year? Are they an average talent, or is it something that can grow into something bigger and better the way it was last year, Doug? What do you think?
This offensive line, I think, is an interesting spot. There was a time a couple years ago where people thought they sort of had a couple misses in some of their recruiting on the offensive line, and a little bit of that, I think, is coming to fruition. With some of the guys who would be juniors and seniors on this team who aren't here, who they didn't get. I think Taylor Decker is a good offensive lineman. I think Pat Elflein and Billy Price at the guard spots have a lot of potential. For a guy like Darrell Baldwin and Jacoby Bourne, there's guys who have paid their dues and been around. I don't think has the potential to be the kind of line when you see Jack Newhart and Corey Linsley starting in the NFL as rookies. And I've said that Corey Linsley had the greatest turnaround in my time at Ohio State. When Corey Linsley was younger, I never would have thought he would be the kind of player he was with the Buckeyes or a guy who could start as a rookie. And I've told him that. That's a miraculous thing. Maybe we see that kind of thing, but I don't think it's going to be – they'll get better. Yeah. I don't think we're going to get close to what we saw with the line last year, though. Not this year.
Okay, one more question. What are Ohio State's offensive coaches doing to combat opposing defenses that are trying to intimidate what Virginia Tech did defensively? Are they trying to develop the short passing game? Now, I'll probably keep this one because I wrote about this on Saturday. I think there's 2 parts to this question. One, Kent State tried to imitate it, but they don't have the athletes to reproduce what Virginia Tech did, so it's kind of hard to evaluate how they were able to respond because frankly put, Ohio State's just better than Kent State across the board. But the thing that Ohio State's going to have to do is get the ball out more, get it to different guys, try to hit short slants the way they did. They exposed them on one play, Virginia Tech, when Michael Thomas hit a slant, broke a tackle, took it to the house. But it really, I think it's most about the development of the wide receivers. Are these guys going to ever be able to beat one-on-one guys when they stack the box if Ohio State can't get their running game going? Is there a receiver on this team that can take a one-on-one coverage situation, double move, go up the field, and score a touchdown? Because I think big plays are the way to stop a defense like that. Ohio State wasn't able to do it, and I think we're still trying to figure out if J.T. Barrett can get on the same page with his receivers and if those receivers can in turn make those plays.
I don't know if that's a good question, but I don't know how much of an issue that's going to be moving forward. If you look at the opponents they're going to have, Michigan State is probably the only team that can come close to throwing that defense at them and then actually having the players to pull it off. Other teams can try it, and it's a tough, and Urban-Meyer said it. He said that's a tough thing to put in a week. Virginia Tech had been working on that clearly for a couple weeks, probably in August started working on that.
I guess a better question, Doug, would be Michigan State certainly took note of what happened. They are probably going to have a package to imitate it. Do you think Ohio State, in the next few weeks or a month before they go in there in November, will be able to combat it if Michigan State tries to come at them the same way?
I think it's going to be tough. I don't think their best chance to combat that is with the deep ball. I think it is with getting the ball in space and quick little things with Jalen Marshall and Dontre Wilson and Curtis Samuel. That initial game plan against Virginia Tech where J.T. Barrett ran the ball a lot and they threw deep a lot, those are not the 2 answers I think that they want to come up with as their main answers to those questions. We're going to move to our 3rd topic of the day, and we do appreciate the feedback and the comments. Keep those coming. Talking about Ohio State's defense now, though. Noah Spence, we know, missed the Kent State game. Urban-Meyer has not said definitively what his plans are going forward. I think it's safe to assume that he's not going to be around for a while from what we've reported and what we've been led to understand. This is a guy who people have projected as a potential first-round draft pick. People have talked about Ohio State having the best defensive line in the country. I don't know that they've played like the best defensive line in the country through the first 3 games. They're certainly not, among the major issues with this team, but I think certainly that line can still be better. Bill, when you look at this line right now, when you think about a guy like Steve Miller probably staying in that spot for Noah Spence, or maybe getting a guy like Tommy Shutt inside on the field more, will they miss Noah Spence a lot? Are they talented enough to make up for his loss, or is he just enough of a playmaker that you take him, out of the equation, and that's a big hit for this team?
I think it's a big hit. It definitely changes things. If you look at the pressure that they've been able to get through the first 3 games, it's been the pressure off the edge has been almost exclusively Joey Bosa. I haven't seen much coming from the other side of that defensive line. And I don't know if it's a good thing, but when you're talking about losing Noah Spence, it's not as if they were 5 weeks into the season and then all of a sudden they don't have Noah Spence anymore. They've been playing without him for the first 3 weeks of the season, so Steve Miller has gotten a lot of opportunities to learn and fill in that void. So if they're going to lose a guy like Spence, this is probably the best situation for that to happen in terms of the timing. But regardless of when it happens, it's going to be a huge hit for the defense because like you said, he's a playmaker. He had 8 sacks last year, I believe. Take 8 sacks away from the defense, I mean, that's huge.
And they have depth. They've talked about the depth on the defensive line as well. I'll be curious to see how they sort of maybe mix and match a little bit more to try to figure this out. Maybe get Adolphus Washington at end instead of tackle, get Tommy Shutt in the game more. I mean, you've seen Noah Spence play. How much of a loss do you think this is?
I think there's a difference between having depth and people who can serviceably play and having a first round to 4th round, depending on where he goes, NFL draft pick that could go in there and change a play by himself. I mean, your favorite thing in the world is talking about Ryan Kerrigan and what he did for Purdue. There is something to be said about a game-changing tight or a defensive end that can really change an entire offense's approach based on just not being able to be blocked. And Ohio State would have had 2 of them this year. So I'm obsessed with dynamic playmaking ability, but that doesn't stop at the skill position players on offense. That means defensive players who can, beat the tackle, jump a pitch, cause a fumble, sack a quarterback from behind, and really change the scope of a game. And I think they're really going to miss that. I think you'd be lying to yourself if you thought that Noah Spence is going to be gone, but it's just the deepest, position group on the team, and it's not a big deal. It's a huge deal. The reason why people thought this was the number 1 offense or defensive line in the country is because they had Bosa and Spence on the bookends. So the interesting thing to me is I wonder what they'll do with Adolphus Washington. I think a lot of people forget that he was a 5-star prospect from the Cincinnati area that was supposed to be a dominant pass edge rusher. And they moved him inside. He's been outside a little bit. He's kind of bounced around, had some injuries. I wonder if this is going to change their approach with him at all because he does have the experience and the versatility. But to pretend like the Noah Spence loss isn't a huge thing, it's wrong.
I just think that it's so interesting when you could potentially have 2 great ends like that, and then you have to decide where are we going to line up the tight end on which side to help out on that end. Where are we going to have the back help out on that pass rusher? Because you can't sort of give a second guy to help or a guy to chip and go out on both defensive ends most of the time, right? So I mean, it's not just about Noah Spence. Is that if you have Noah Spence in the field, it makes Joey Bosa better. Joey Bosa is already really good. If you give teams less opportunity to focus on him, it makes Joey Bosa that much better. So I think that's the hard part, and I know there's some disappointment about the idea of it's great to have a great player. Boy, if you can get guys talking about maybe 3 potential first-round picks and Michael Bennett, Joey Bosa, and Noah Spence on the same line, you make it really, really hard on opposing offenses. Our 4th question of the day, we're going to go a little broader view, and we're going to revisit what we thought at the start of the season. And at the start of the season, Ari and I both predicted Ohio State to go 10-2 this year, with a non-conference loss and 7-1 in the Big Ten. We don't know what Bill thought because we didn't know him then. We're 3 games into the season. They are 2-1. Are you sticking with 10-2, Ari, or what would be your predicted record for Ohio State right now based on what you've seen with them and with the rest of the Big Ten?
I'm batting 1,000 right now, so.
In life, man, you're batting 1,000 in life.
Yeah, no, I'm crushing it. But I think I'm going to stay put. Even though I do believe, and I think you'll get to this, that Ohio State might actually be one game worse than we anticipated. But, right now I just think so far from what we've seen from Ohio State, exactly what I anticipated. An offense that struggled, a defense that's got new pieces going, and, just a whole package that necessarily isn't in a situation where they can run the table. But they did already suffer the loss that I thought they were going to suffer. I think that, I don't want to spoil next week, but that Ohio State will potentially or probably will win at Cincinnati. Or maybe I'll change my mind. Just stay tuned. You don't know that. And I just don't think the Big Ten has enough teams that can make Ohio State pay for being in the situation they're in right now. I will say that they are more prone than every team that I've covered, maybe outside of 2011, to lose a game that they shouldn't. Because if things go wrong for this team, they don't have the playmakers on offense that they used to that can just run the ball and fix it. So they could lose a game that they probably shouldn't. But right now I'm going to stick with another loss to Michigan State, run the table for the rest of the Big Ten, and potentially be in the top 12 at the end of the year to play in one of those old BCS bowls.
We did not get a pick from you at the start of the year, Bill. What do you think now? And is 11-1 out there? I mean, is that any kind of realistic option in your mind? So what's your pick, and how possible is 11-1, do you think?
Well, had I had the opportunity to pick preseason with my illustrious company to my right here, I probably would have said 11-1 with the one loss being Michigan State. Now, obviously, they've lost to Virginia Tech. As it stands right now, no, I don't think 11-1 is a possibility. I think Michigan State is clearly a better football team at this point. That can change. There's still a lot of time between now and when Ohio State goes up to East Lansing. But my prediction for the rest of the year would be 10-2, along the same lines of Ari. I think they lose to Michigan State. I think they could lose to Cincinnati. And Penn State on the road at night is not going to be an easy one either. So it's very possible we're looking at 9-3 or 8-4. But I think Penn State is good enough to get by on, Ohio State is good enough to get by on its talent to beat Penn State, to beat Cincinnati. But I don't know if it's good enough to get by on its talent to beat Michigan State.
Ohio State is I say this every time. Ohio State is always only half the equation. We analyze the Buckeyes, we cover the Buckeyes, we do everything with the Buckeyes. They got to play other people. Doesn't matter the problems that you have. If the other team has more problems, you're probably going to beat them. So if anyone has been paying attention to the Big Ten so far, I think, in my opinion, the Big Ten so far would be terrible. I mean, I don't know what the right word necessarily would be.
And you were on my back.
So when you think about the Buckeyes going into this schedule and where they could trip up, Maryland, you started thinking, maybe if they get some stuff going. I mean, they just lost a shootout with West Virginia. They were way down in that game. They came back, but they sort of showed where their holes were as well. So in my mind, to start at 10-2, I started at 10-2, as you did. I'm going to say 9-3 right now. If you were coming to me right now fresh, and I like to start fresh with my poll voting each week, and if I'm starting fresh now, I would think this is a 9-3 team, just because I think Cincinnati is going to be a dangerous game, and then Michigan State obviously is going to be very difficult up there. But even if they would beat Cincinnati, it just feels like the kind of team, the way we're talking about it, where there's something out there. Mm-hmm. As much as the 2012 team got praised for going undefeated, and they should get praised for that. I mean, that Purdue game at home in overtime with the backup quarterback to try to win that game, I mean, that's a miraculous thing practically. That game, I think, is out there for this team, that type of game against somebody that maybe you don't expect. And do they find a way to get it done? I mean, there's a lot of luck that goes into this game. And to expect that if we think the Michigan State game is going to be very difficult, and then you think they'll win every other week, they'll find a way. They have problems, but they'll find a way every week outside of Michigan State.
Yeah.
I think that's a lot to ask. So if you were starting with me right now, I'd say 9-3. And now we get to the biggest question on our list. Our fifth question of the day, and the one that can't be ignored any longer. What is wrong with this conference? This is unbelievable to me. This is my 10th season covering Ohio State. The Big Ten has not been great in many of those years. Right now, the Big Ten is 1-10 in non-conference play against other power conference teams. They are 13-13 against anybody at their level, against FBS teams. They played all those FCS schools, those Division I AA schools. That's where they're piling up their wins right now. It is staggering to me, the inability of this conference to go out and compete with anybody else on their level. And there are lots of reasons for that. There are recruiting reasons. There are coaching reasons. I'm tired of hearing about demographics because there are a lot of good players right here in the Midwest that are not coming to Big Ten schools and are not getting developed by Big Ten schools. This is a problem for a conference that has a lot of money, has done a lot of things to get more money, and at the moment is unable, seemingly, to spend that money in any kind of way that translates to consistent, broad success on the field. I know people are moving to where it is warm. You've got to win some non-conference games. Guess where it's not warm? It's not warm in Oregon. I don't know what the demographics are of Oregon, but if they're going out and recruiting kids in Texas or anywhere else in the country, if you can tell a kid to go to Oregon to play, you should be able to tell a kid to go to Wisconsin to play, to go to Michigan State to play. Michigan State's been good. This is not directed at Michigan State. To go to Minnesota to play, it is unbelievable the amount of excuses that people give this conference. Bill, when you think about the Big Ten right now, what are your hopes for this league the rest of the year? Now, the good thing is when they start conference play, as I understand it, it's impossible for two Big Ten teams to both lose when they're playing each other. One of them has to win. So they'll start, having a good 500 record against each other. What do you think is up with the Big Ten, and what are we looking at this year?
I think you're looking at, frankly, some mediocre football the rest of the way. I think Michigan State's a good football team, and Ohio State could possibly be a good football team. Wisconsin is good. Nebraska is unbeaten, but almost lost to McNeese State at home. So I honestly don't know what to make of it. I've tried to think about that for 3 weeks now, what is going on with this conference. And a lot's going wrong with it. I mean, if you look at the national picture, like we touched on it earlier, can Ohio State get in? I don't know if anyone in the Big Ten can get into the college football playoff, regardless of what happens the rest of the way. Too much needs to happen in these other conferences that are clearly better than the Big Ten for the Big Ten to have any shot at getting back to national relevance in this season.
Before we get to you, Ari, I just want to run down the list, what I like to call games the Big Ten could lose this weekend. Iowa could lose to Pitt. Nebraska, one of two undefeated teams along with Penn State, could lose to Miami. Maryland could lose to Syracuse. Utah could go in and beat Michigan. I think that probably will happen. Rutgers is the only Big Ten team with a power conference win. They are underdogs against Navy this week. Indiana's going to go lose at Missouri, and the Bowling Green, Wisconsin game, I'll tell you, I don't think that's a sure thing. No. Ari, what are we talking about with the Big Ten here?
Do you want me to give you another minute?
I'm going to throw my pen.
Do you want me to?
You're good.
Yeah. It's just bad, man. It's just bad. I think that, I'm the recruiting dude, so I think that the number one thing is that they're just not recruiting players. And they're not recruiting players in states that they should be recruiting players in. And I think Ohio's the biggest one. There's some stuff that we will probably be working on here shortly, dissecting it for you in print form. But there are just too many good players in the state of Ohio and the Midwest that aren't staying in these areas. And they are losing out to teams in the SEC. They're losing out to, there are times when MAC schools are getting 3-star prospects out of Ohio that should be going to Purdue. And I think that's part of the reason why you're seeing the top half of the MAC is better than the bottom half of the Big Ten. And that's kind of a mesh that you don't want to keep having. I think that there should be separation between a Purdue and a Miami of Ohio. And right now, is it really that big of a difference? So the laundry list of issues that this conference is facing is pretty long. And I'll throw it back to you, Doug.
Ohio State off this week, coming back with Cincinnati the week after. We, of course, will continue with our coverage all through the week here at cleveland.com. Thank you for watching here for our second Ohio State Big Ten football show of the year, along with Bill Landis, along with Ari Wasserman. I'm Doug Lesmerises, and I'll try not to be so angry. I'm sorry.